In the summer of 72 BC, Pompey's legions marched through the foothills of the Pyrenees and burned a village to the ground. We don't know its name. The people who lived there left no written records, no monuments, no great works of architecture. The Romans didn't bother to document it. As far as history was concerned, this small hilltop settlement in what is now northern Spain simply ceased to exist. The roofs caved in, the mud brick walls swallowed everything underneath, and for 2,093 years, nobody looked. Then, in the summer of 2021, an archaeologist working a routine excavation on the slopes of Mount Irulegi, 5 miles from the modern city of Pamplona, reached into the earth on the threshold of one of those collapsed houses and pulled out something small and flat and shaped like a human hand. And what was written on it would rewrite the history of an entire language. Here is what we know, here is what we don't, and here is why it matters far more than most people realize. Europe has a secret that has been hiding in plain sight for centuries. Tucked into the Western Pyrenees, straddling the border between northern Spain and southern France, there is a group of people who speak a language that does not belong. Not just unusual, not just old. Structurally, grammatically, and etymologically, unlike any other language on the planet. It has no confirmed ancestors, no living relatives, no known cousins anywhere in the world. That language is Basque. And linguists have spent the better part of 200 years trying to explain where it came from. Every major theory has been proposed. Caucasian origin, connection to ancient Iberian, descended from proto-Indo-European branches that simply did not survive. One researcher in the 20th century proposed, entirely without irony, that it might trace back to Atlantis. It did not, but the fact that the suggestion was made at all tells you something about the level of desperation that sets in when the conventional tools of historical linguistics simply stop working. The mainstream view today is that Basque is the last surviving member of a family of pre-Indo-European languages that once spread widely across Western Europe long before Latin and its descendants swept them away. Every other pre-Indo-European language in Western Europe is extinct. Basque somehow survived. Nobody is entirely sure why. But here is the deeper problem. If Basque is that old, if it really does trace its roots back to the Iron Age or earlier, then there should be written evidence. Inscriptions, records, something. And for a very long time, there was almost nothing. A handful of words on coins, a few names scratched into stone, barely enough to confirm the language existed at all before the Romans arrived and Latinized everything. That is what made the bronze hand so significant. That is what made one of the world's foremost experts on pre-Roman inscriptions stare at the object in front of him and say nothing for a very long time. The Vascones were the tribe who lived in this region. Roman writers knew about them. The historian Livy mentions them. Pliny the Elder records their presence in the 1st century BC, settled in the foothills of the Pyrenees in the area that is now Navarre. They were not considered important by Rome, they were not a major military power, they were not known for art or trade or philosophy. They were a small Iron Age community that mostly kept to themselves, and crucially, scholars had long assumed they could not write. The evidence seemed to support this. When archaeologists and linguists looked for written Vasconic, they found almost nothing. A few coins minted during a specific political period with short words pressed into them. That was it. The consensus formed quietly but firmly. The Vascones were pre-literate. They did not develop a writing system of their own. Writing only came to them when the Romans arrived with the Latin alphabet. That assumption was, it turns out, completely wrong. The inscription on the Hand of Irulegi is 40 symbols long. It is arranged across 4 lines on the back of the hand. It uses the northeastern Iberian script, a writing system borrowed from neighboring peoples, which the Vascones appear to have adapted for their own use. 3 faint guidelines were scored into the bronze before the letters were engraved, which means whoever made this was not improvising. They knew what they were doing. They had done this before. This was the work of a literate person in a community that used writing long before any Roman soldier set foot in their valley. Now we need to talk about what it actually says, because this is where the case gets genuinely strange. Of the 5 words on the hand, only one has been decoded with any confidence. The first word, Sorioneku. Researchers recognize it because of how closely it resembles a word that still exists in modern Basque today, Zorioneko. It means good fortune, blessed, lucky. And that single word combined with where the object was found tells a very specific story. The hand was discovered directly on the threshold of a house, not buried in the floor, not stored in a back room. It was at the doorway, in a position consistent with having been nailed above the entrance. There is a small hole near the wrist which confirms it. This object was hung on a door. Somebody placed it there deliberately with a word for good fortune written on it, and it stayed there until the day Pompey's army arrived. Think about what that means. 2,000 years ago, a person who spoke an ancestor of a language still spoken today walked out of their home for the last time and left a small bronze hand above their door wishing their house good luck. They never came back. The roof came down, the hand fell to the threshold and stayed there face up in the dark. The other 4 words have not been translated. There is simply not enough comparative material. The Vasconic language, even after this discovery, remains extraordinarily poorly documented. The Hand of Irulegi is the longest text ever found in it. That is both exciting and sobering in equal measure. The longest text is 40 symbols, 5 words, and we can only read one of them. What researchers cannot yet determine with certainty is whether the language on the hand is a direct ancestor of modern Basque or a closely related language that eventually disappeared. There is a difference and it matters. If it is a direct ancestor, then Basque has a documented lineage stretching back to at least the 1st century BC. If it is a close relative that went extinct, then the picture becomes more complicated. What it confirms without question is that Vasconic was being written before the Romans arrived, that the people of this region had a functional relationship with literacy, and that the assumption made by generations of scholars was wrong. The lead researcher on the study, Javier Vilaça, a professor of Latin philology at the University of Barcelona and one of the foremost experts on pre-Roman inscriptions in the world, described his reaction when he first analyzed the piece. He said, when they told him what it was, tears came to his eyes, not because of what it confirmed, but because of what it opened up. Now let's go back to the fire. Because the fire is not a footnote. The fire is the reason any of this exists at all. Between roughly 80 BC and 72 BC, the Iberian Peninsula was the main theater of a Roman civil war known as the Sertorian conflict. Quintus Sertorius, a rebel Roman general, had allied himself with various Iberian tribes and was holding off Rome's armies for years. The Vascones of Irulegi appear to have chosen a side. Exactly which side is not recorded. What is recorded in the fact of the burnt layer that archaeologists found across the entire settlement is that they chose wrong. Pompey's legions came through and the village was destroyed completely. The people fled. Nobody returned to salvage anything. No later settlement was built on top of it. The ruins were simply left, and over time the earth covered them and the centuries passed. The director of the Irulegi excavation, Matin Ayestaran, described what this means for archaeology. He said the destruction was, strangely, a gift. Because the village was burned and abandoned in a single violent moment, everything inside the houses was sealed exactly as it was on the day of the attack. No disturbance, no later occupation mixing up the layers. The fire that ended the settlement also preserved it. What they have, he said, is a snapshot of the moment of the attack. Everyday objects exactly where they were left. The material culture of a people who simply vanished from the record, frozen in place. The hand was part of that moment, nailed above a door on a day when the sky over the Pyrenees was full of smoke and the people of Irulegi were running. There is one more layer to this that tends to get lost in the coverage of the discovery, and it is the one that sits with you longest. The design of the hand itself has no known parallel in the region. Researchers who have studied the artifact note that hand-shaped objects of this kind are not found in Spanish Iron Age culture or in Celtiberian culture or in the various neighboring traditions of the northern Iberian Peninsula. Nobody made things that looked like this. That raises a question that the artifact does not yet answer. Where did the design come from? Was it unique to the Vascones? Was it imported from somewhere further away? Is there a tradition of hand-shaped protective charms in this culture that simply has not survived because so little of Vasconic material culture has survived at all? We do not know, and the honest answer is that we may never know unless something else turns up in the soil of the Pyrenean foothills that nobody has found yet. What we are left with is the object itself, a flat bronze sheet 14.5 centimeters long, weighing 36 grams, 5 fingers, a small hole near the wrist where it was once attached to a door, 40 symbols on the back. One word we can read, 4 we cannot. The oldest written text in the history of a language that is itself one of the oldest and most isolated in the world. It is now on display at the Museum of Navarre in Pamplona, a few miles from the hill where it was found. The museum renovated the room to house it properly. Behind glass, lit from above, it looks like exactly what it is, a small human hand reaching forward out of the ancient world, asking for a little good fortune. The Vasconans never got theirs, but they left us something extraordinary in the wreckage. If you want to follow more cases like this one, make sure you are subscribed to Vestigia Archive. Every video is a case file. Every artifact has a story that most people have never heard.